just want to review so that we all understand some of the unusual features of when you have a leap year and you have two Adars. We had discussed last week an apparent contradiction in the psak of the Ramah. The Ramah, basing himself on a very late Rishon called the Mahari Mintz, had said that when you have two Adars, you commemorate a bar mitzvah in the second Adar, an Adar Sheni. So if the person was born in a regular year and his bar mitzvah year falls out in a leap year, you commemorate the bar mitzvah in Adar Sheni. But when a person wants to observe a yahrzeit, if the death of a parent took place in a regular Adar and it's a leap year, you commemorate the yahrzeit in Adar Rishon. That's how the Ramah had paskin, and then he brought another opinion from the Maharil, who says that you commemorate Adar in both months. And that's actually brought down la halacha, that at least by Ashkenazim, that at the very minimum you should commemorate the yahrzeit in the first Adar, but it's considered to be virtuous to go like the Maharil and commemorate the yahrzeit in both Adars. And the question is, why is there a difference between the commemoration of a bar mitzvah and the commemoration of a yahrzeit? So we went into detail in the tshuva from the Mahari Mintz, and then we spoke out the way that the Chassam Sofer understands the Mahari Mintz. And I just want to be able just to speak this out once again so that we have some level of clarity on the issue. The Mahari Mintz had basically said that the real Adar is Adar Sheni. And we had offered an explanation that the reason is because, like the Gemara had said, mismach geula legeula adif, that there's a certain benefit to making sure that the last month of the year, which is the year of Purim, the month of Purim rather, should be adjacent to the beginning of the year, which is the month of Nisan, which represents the month of redemption. So you want to have a month of redemption adjacent to another month of redemption. Chazal, however, needed to insert periodically an additional month to make sure that Pesach would always fall out in the spring. And so therefore they inserted that month before the last month, and they called it Adar as well. They called it Adar Rishon, and this is Adar Sheni. But the real Adar, and the Adar that is determined according to the Beis Din, is the second Adar. And therefore, when it comes to any halachos which require a person reaching an age that depends upon the completion of a year, so that year is completed upon Adar Sheni. And the Mahari Mintz put it in terms of that heaven subjugates itself to the will of the Beis Din. So that even though there are certain halachic phenomena that are dependent upon the physiology of a child, so for example, when it comes to bar mitzvah, the child is considered to be chayiv in mitzvahs when he reaches physical maturity, which takes place upon his bar mitzvah. The physical maturation of the child is delayed an additional month, and Hashem conforms the order of nature to the will of Beis Din. So it's really, when you think about it, it was really truly a very mind-expanding kind of concept, that Hashem allows the laws of nature to conform chronologically to the will of Beis Din. That's what the Mahari Mintz had said, that the real Adar is Adar Sheni. Why then, when we observe yahrzeit, do we observe it in Adar Rishon? So the Mahari Mintz explained, because the commemoration of yahrzeit is after 12 months. And he had based it upon a pasuk in Yeshaya, which is quoted by the Mishnah in Idios, which says, V'haya midei chodesh b'chodsho, that every month in its proper month. And the Mishnah uses that statement to teach me that the judgment of the wicked in Gehenna is exactly 12 months. And from here we learn, says the Mahari Mintz, that the period of judgment of a person who has passed away from this world ends upon the completion of 12 months, not upon the completion of a year, but rather upon the completion of 12 months. And therefore it turns out that it is appropriate to commemorate the yahrzeit of an individual upon the completion of that individual's judgment. And that's the first year of yahrzeit. so that every 12 months the person undergoes a revisitation of that judgment. Well, this resulted, and so therefore it's very clear to understand that if a person passes away in a regular Adar, then you should have the commemoration of their yahrzeit 12 months later, which is on Adar Rishon, not in Adar Sheni. And as a matter of fact, here the Maharimins quoted a different pasuk, which implies that God would not prolong the judgment of an individual just because of the pronouncements of a Beis Din. So you have two sort of opposing principles based on two different psukim. One principle is that God conforms the laws of nature, of growth and chronology in the physical world based upon the pronouncements of Beis Din. And another pasuk says just the opposite, or not really just the opposite, but an opposing idea, which is that when it comes for a person receiving atonement or reprieve from their punishment, God is not going to prolong their agony in Gehenna just because Beis Din added another month. So those are the two opposing features or factors, and that's why when it comes to a bar mitzvah, we make it in Adar Sheni, and why when it comes to yahrzeit, we make it in Adar Rishon. The Chassam Sofer just added that we have this basic question that really doesn't really make sense according to the Maharimins. Let's say a person passes away in Adar Rishon, in a leap year, and the following year is a regular year. There's only one Adar. What's 12 months later? If you're going to use the criterion as 12 months, then it should be in Shvat, should be the yahrzeit. And then what about the year following the first year? Are you going to say that following the first year you count 12 months from the day in Shvat, and count 12 months from there? Well, what if that next year is an Ibra year, is a leap year? So then it'll turn out that you're always going to be, every few years, you're going to be losing a month from the day, like almost like the Muslim calendar, like the day of the yahrzeit will be a month earlier every few years. So the Chassam Sofer concludes that you have to sort of modify what the Maharimins really means. When he says that the yahrzeit does not conform to the pronouncements of the Beis Din, but rather to 12 months, that's with one proviso, that it ends up in a month with the same name as Adar. So therefore, if the person passed away in En Adar, and here it's a little bit difficult to understand why the name of the month should make a difference. After all, the Maharimin said that it's really not Adar, it just happens to be an added month that they had to put in order to allow Adar to be a little bit later in the year. But nevertheless, you have to say that because Chazal called this an Adar, and we want to not prolong a person's judgment, so we'll put it to Adar Rishon and not Adar Sheni. But if the month isn't even called Adar anymore, and the person's date of passing is in Adar, so then the yahrzeit has to fall out in a month which at least has the name of Adar, in order for that to have any meaning, even Klape Shmaya, even in heaven, in order for the judgment to be changed or for a person to ascend from one shlav to the next. Because as we know, at every yahrzeit, a person's neshama ascends from one level to another after going through judgment on that yahrzeit.
So if someone's yahrzeit is the 30th of Adar Rishon.
Okay, 30th of Adar Rishon is a special case, which we're going to get to shortly. Okay, so the last two subjects that I want to deal with, and that'll be the topic of tonight's discussion, is two issues, which are also part of this anomaly of the double Adar year. Number one is the commemoration of Zayin Adar, which is the death of Moshe Rabbeinu, the birth and yahrzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu. And the second issue is the issue of the 30th of Adar, because the Adar only has 30 days in Adar Rishon and doesn't have 30 days in Adar Sheni, nor does it have 30 days in a regular year where there's only one Adar. So this will have ramifications. If a person passes away on the 30th of Adar, how do you observe the yahrzeit in a regular year? Okay. So take a look at source number 7, which is from the Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Lamed Ches Amud Aleph. So the Gemara asks the question, Minayin shebeshiva ba'adar meis. How do we know that Moshe Rabbeinu passed away on the 7th of Adar? Shenamar, Vayamas Shem Moshe Eved Hashem. We know this because it says in the pasuk in Parshas V'zos HaBracha, which we read on Simchas Torah, that Moshe Rabbeinu died on Har Nevo, right? Uchesiv vayivku b'nei Yisrael es Moshe be'arvos Moav shaloshim yom. And then it says in Sefer Yehoshua that they cried for Moshe in the plains of Moab for 30 days. Uchesiv vayhi acharei Moshe Eved Hashem. And it was after the death of Moshe, Uchesiv Moshe avdi meis ve'ata kum avor, that God says to Yehoshua, Moshe, my servant, has died. This is the Haftorah for Simchas Torah, for those of you who are still in shul, for the Haftorah. And it says, Hashem says to Yehoshua, Moshe, my servant, has died, and now it's time for you to pass over the Jordan River. Uchesiv ivru bekerev hamachane v'tzavu es ha'am leimor, hachinu lachem tzeidah ki be'ot shloshes yomim ta'avru es ha'yardein. That God says, giving charge to Yoshua, Yoshua tells the people that you have 3 days to prepare, because in 3 days we're going to be crossing the Jordan. So now you have 30 days of mourning for Moshe, and another 3 days of preparation for passing over the Jordan. That's a total of 33 days after Moshe's death. So Chesiv v'ha'am alu min hayarden be'asar lachodesh harishon. And when did they cross over the Jordan? On the 10th of the first month, the 10th of Nisan. Okay, tzei mehem shloshim u'shlosha yomim l'mafreya. If you subtract 33 days going backwards from the 10th of Nisan, what do you get? Halamadata shebeshiva ba'adar meis Moshe. So that shows you that Moshe Rabbeinu passed away on the 7th of Adar. Uminayin shebeshiva ba'adar nolad Moshe. Then the Gemara asks the question, how do you know that Moshe was born on the 7th of Adar? Shenemar vayomer alehem ben me'ah ve'esrim shana anochi hayom. Lo uchal od lotzeis v'lavo. In Parshas Vayelech, Moshe gathers the people together, and he says to them, I am 120 years old today. I can no longer go out and come in. So why does the pasuk say the word today? I am 120. She'ein tamulomer hayom. Ma tamulomer hayom. Melamed she'akadosh baruch hu yoshev u'mamalei shenoseim shel tzadikim miyom liyom u'mechodesh l'chodesh. This teaches me that Moshe Rabbeinu on that very day turned 120. Because we know that Hashem completes the years of the righteous from day to day and from month to month, which means this is a sign of righteousness. You're probably familiar with this idea, that a person who's righteous passes away on the very same day that they were born. Shenamar es mispar yamecha amalei. This is one of the brachos that is given to the righteous, that God says, I will complete your years. You will complete a unit, right? This is the sense of completion, that I've lived a full life if I die on the same day that I was born. Okay, so that we know therefore that Moshe Rabbeinu died on Zayin Adar, and he was born on Zayin Adar. And you're probably familiar with the very famous Gemara in Megillah, which I did not copy for you, which is that Hummin had made a cheshbon. This is a Gemara in Megillah. Why did Hummin choose the month of Adar as the day for the destruction of the Jewish people? Because he knew that Moshe Rabbeinu had died in the month of Adar. So he knew that this was a tragic month, a month where the mazel of the Jewish people must have been bad if their great leader would pass away in that month. But, says the Gemara, what he didn't realize is that he was also born during that month. So therefore it was a propitious month, not a tragic month. Okay, there is a siman in Shulchan Aruch, in siman Tav Kuf Pei, Hilchas Tainis. And there's a certain sif in Tav Kuf Pei which goes through a number of days where there is a minhag to fast, and most of those days are no longer observed as fast days. It's an interesting discussion as to why the Mechaber brings these days down in Shulchan Aruch, even though he writes in the Beis Yosef that the prevailing minhag is not to fast on these days. But I was just told recently that there even are people in our Kehillah that fast on Zayin Adar. But Zayin Adar is one of those days where there's a minhag to fast. There are other people who use Zayin Adar as an opportunity not to say Tachana. And that in itself is also a question. How did it become that on normally the day that a tzaddik passes away, the day of the Yartzeit, is a day of kapara, where you're supposed to fast? How did it turn into that the day that a tzaddik dies is a day when we rejoice? You might recall that a couple of years ago I gave a shiur on the whole concept of Lag BaOmer, where we talked about this concept. You can go back and search for it on KosherTube and have that look into that. But in any event, on this discussion of Zayin Adar, the Magen Avraham tells us something very interesting. He says, Kasuv b'tshuvas maharil siman lamed aleph, haminhag lihisanos ba'adar rishon. that the minhag is to fast for Zayin Adar during the first Adar, when you have an Iber Yor. V'chein kosa b'trumas hadeshin simin reish sadi dalid. Afal gav shebegemara muchach she'osa shana lo haisa me'uberes ayin sham. He says, even though it's clear from the Gemara that it was not an Iber Yor, because as we just went through the Gemara in Kiddushin, the way that you get 33 days from the day of Moshe's death to the day that they crossed the Jordan, it had to be a regular Adar, or at least an Adar Sheni. But in any event, v'ayin b'yalkid Yehoshua, v'ikam andam shahisa muberes u'meis ba'adar rishon, v'chad omar shemeis b'zayin b'shvat ayin sham. There are other opinions. He says there's a Manda Omar apparently in the Medrash that says that that year was a leap year and he died in the first Adar. And there's another Manda Omar that says that he died in the 7th of Shvat and not in the 7th of Adar. So where does this all come from? So one thing we know is that the Magen Avraham holds that you should really commemorate Zayin Adar in Adar Rishon and not in Adar Sheni. Now, if we're going to go like the Maharimins, then it makes perfectly good sense why you should commemorate a Yortzeit in the first Adar, not in the second Adar. But the Magen Avraham doesn't seem to be holding like the Maharimins. He says that the whole reason is based upon when did Moshe Rabbeinu actually die. Take a look at the tshuva from the Yavitz, from Rav Yaakov Emden, and he asked the following question. This is in Chelak Aleph Siman Kuf Yud Zayin. Heich yesh linhog b'shana me'uberes b'tayna Zayin Adar yom misas Moshe Rabbeinu olav hashalom. How should we conduct ourselves on Zayin Adar, in a leap year? Tshuva. Bevadai kvar yadata v'ra'isa mashakosef b'Magen Avram's Siman Tav Kuf Pei. Well, first of all, I'm sure you've seen the Magen Avraham, says the Rav Yaakov Emden. V'nira de lo psika le milsa lihisanos berishon kedas maharil v'trumas adeshin umitziyuno nira sheda'ato note yoser lekovu b'sheni. He says, if you look at the language carefully at the Magen Avraham, it seems that the Magen Avraham is equivocating somewhat, and it therefore seems, based upon the sources that he cites, that perhaps he's actually advocating that maybe not the first Adar, maybe the second Adar. And my father, I believe the father of Yaakov Emden was the Chacham Tzvi, right? And my father also held that you should fast in the second Adar. And this would make it in the same genre of Purim, whereas just like Purim is always in the second Adar, so too Zayin Adar, Moshe Rabbeinu's Yortzeit, is always in the second Adar. Umistaverle, Dahaba Hatalia, and it makes sense to my father to say that, because really when you think about it, Zayin Adar and Purim are actually linked together midrashically. Shabo hayahanes kiramrinan shekeben shenafal hagor lifnei Haman ba'adar samach v'hu lo yada shebeshiva ba'adar meis uveshiva bo nolad shehigina zuchuso shel Moshe. As I quoted the Gemara, I really didn't quote the Gemara accurately. The Gemara doesn't say that he chose Adar. It means that he took lots and it fell on Adar, and he rejoiced and he said, this is a good siman from Shemayim for me to kill the Jews, because this is the month that Moshe Rabbeinu died. And what he didn't realize is that Moshe was also born. So therefore you see that the story of Moshe's death is directly related to the miracle of Purim. Im kein bedinu sheta'aniso upurim shavin lios nohagin b'chodesh echad ad kan divrei harav zal divrei peh, I forget what this chen something divrei peh something chen. Okay, but this is an acronym of praise for the person who is speaking. V'li talmido hatzair hayanira lichora detalya beplukta de amoroi sof perakama desota. He says, but it would seem to me that this whole shaila as to whether you should commemorate Zayin Adar in the first Adar or in the second Adar is really dependent upon another machlokis in another Gemara, and this time in Sota. De'ifligu biyom shehushlach Moshe Rabbeinu layor. There's a machlokis as to when Moshe Rabbeinu was placed in the Nile by his parents. Chad Omar Shisha b'Sivan Haya. One says that it was the 6th of Sivan, which is the day of Matan Torah, which is, there's the direct spiritual connection, that the day that Moshe Rabbeinu was placed in the Nile is the very same day that the Jews would receive the Torah. V'chad Omar Chof Aleph B'Nisan. And the other man d'Omer says that it was the 21st of Nisan that he was placed in the Nile. Uparach Talmuda, so the Gemara asks, Bishlam Laman d'Omer Shisha B'Sivan, Haina de Mishkachas La Tlasa Yarche. We have a tradition that when the Torah says that she could not hide him anymore, V'lo Yachala Od Hatzafino, that she couldn't hide him anymore is because he had reached the age of 3 months. He was becoming a precocious child at 3 months. And not only that, but she had given birth at 6 months. So the Egyptians had calculated that she wouldn't have a child until 3 months from that time. So 3 months after she gave birth to Moshe, which was miraculously a birth at 6 months of a healthy, viable child, she had to find another place for him because then she knew the Egyptians would come looking for him. So the Gemara says it makes sense to say that this was, if you say that it was the 6th of Sivan, so then that's 3 months after Zayin Adar. But if you're going to tell me that it's the 21st of Nisan, and we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was born in Zayin Adar, how do you reconcile that? After all, you don't have 3 months from Zayin Adar to 21 Nisan. So So the Gemara answers that according to that opinion, Moshe Rabbeinu was born during an Iber Yor. So that you have the Zayin Adar, he's born Zayin Adar Aleph, so you have a part of the month of Adar Rishon, you have the whole month of Adar Sheni, and then you have a portion of Nisan, 21 days of Nisan, so that gives you at least Shlosha Chadashim, what we call Mikuta'im, which means at least partial months, which add up to 3 months. And that's where we get this idea of 3 months, that after 3 months she had to place him in the Nile. In Cain, Kilo asinan leplugta, v'kimlan kepashta demilsa, chamosha kosav shisha b'sivan haya. So if we learn like the normative Manda Amar that says that he was placed in the Nile on the 6th of Sivan, Yom leidasa lo haya rachok miyom matan Torah ki'im gimel chadashim. So then the day of his birth was 3 months before the day of the giving of the Torah, which was 6 Sivan. Uviyom shenolet bomes, and on the day that he was born, that's the day that he died. Lefizeh vaday ein lanu laharchik yom ta'anis misaso yoser migimel chadasha miyom matan Torah kiyom leidasa. And therefore, we should always make sure that the day of Moshe Rabbeinu's yortzeit is 3 months before the giving of the Torah. And since the Torah is being given on the 6th of Sivan, we should make sure that we subtract 3 months from that. So it depends. If it's a regular year, it's Zayin Adar. If it's a leap year, it should be Zayin Adar Sheni. Kakosov b'Torah shalohaya muflag ela gimel chadashim. Umadua nosif alav chodesh. Why should we add a month? Because for Rabbi Yaakov Emden, there is a direct link between Moshe Rabbeinu's birth and the day of the giving of the Torah, and it's a 3-month gap between those two dates. Baram lamanda Omar osa shana me'uberes ha'isa. But if you say that it was a leap year, imken al korchenu tzarach laharchik yom leidasum in chaf aleph benissen gimel chadasha mekuta in lepachos. But if he was born on an Iber Yor, so then we would have to distance the Moshe's birth from the 21st of Nisan at least a portion of 3 months. V'iyefsher ela berishon v'chein tzarach lios b'yom misaso. So then it would be Adar Rishon. So it's a machlokas amoraim, basically, says the Rabbi Yaakov Emden, as to whether to observe Moshe Rabbeinu's yortzeit and Adar Rishon or Adar Sheni, based on this machlokas as to when he was placed in the Nile. Lefisha HaKadosh Baruch Hu Memale Shenoseim Shel Tzadikim Yom Liyom U'Mechodesh Chodesh, as we said. V'ali b'dahachman da'amar b'vadai shenas misaso k'mokein me'uberes ha'isa v'niftar b'rishon. And according to that man da'amar, since Hashem completes the years of a tzaddik, so then it stands to reason that if Moshe Rabbeinu was born in a leap year, he also died in a leap year, so that his yortzeit could fall out exactly on the same date of Zayin Adar Rishon, just like his birth. And that really explains the Yalkut Yehoshua that the Magen Avraham quoted as to why do we know that he died on Zayin Adar Rishon, based upon the fact that he was born on Zayin Adar Rishon. Even though it doesn't work out well with the Sugya in Kiddushin, because now according to this Manda Omar, there is more than 3 months between Moshe's birth and his being placed in the Nile, if you learn that it's Vav Sivan, but nevertheless, we're not obligated to commit to that, because it's a machlokas amoraim. Nihas bein lamar vein lamar vadei lo meis b'sheni. But we certainly know one thing, that Moshe Rabbeinu did not die In the second Adar, v'siyata l'das b'trumas adesh v'sugin da'alma lis anos berishon mishumachim mistavra dehechidinog shaper dami hanira lanias daiti yavitz sat, or safa tove, or simin tov. The different explanations what samach test, but basically what he essentially is arguing is that either Moshe Rabbeinu was born in a regular year, and we go according to the Mando Omar that Vav Sivan he was placed in the Nile, or he was born in an Iber Yor and born in the first Adar, and he was placed in the Nile in the 21st of Nisan. So basically, there is an advantage to either opinion, concludes Rabbi Yaakov Emden, and therefore each community should comport itself according to its minhag. What is our minhag here in Thornhill, in the BAYT? I can only tell you that the Chever Kadisha, which has a tradition of having its annual dinner on Zayin Adar, will be having its dinner this Sunday evening, not last month. So apparently, we go according to the other opinion, not the opinion of that the Magen Avraham presents first. Can I tell you for sure that that's based upon a known tradition? No, I can't. I have no idea. Maybe it just because the Chever Kadisha didn't get its act together in the first Adar, so they chose the second Adar. I have no idea, but I'm just letting you know that it's really optional, because what the Rabbi Yaakov Emden is arguing is that the Magen Avraham himself is equivocating, and therefore Rabbi Yaakov Emden says it really could be based on a machlokas amoraim, and there's no resolution. Okay.
The Gemara in Kedushin is pretty stark. I mean, it's you do 33 days. I mean, the Torah says Torah, right? It's 30 days plus 3. I don't know how you ignore that. It says V'yomas Moshe, it says Shloshim Yoim, and it says.
According to that Gemara, you'd have to say that Moshe Rabbeinu was not born on the same day as the day that he died. In other words, according to this Manda Omar that says he was born in Adar Rishon, you'd have to say, No. You would say that the day that he died was a regular year. It was not a leap year. So that would work out well. He was born in Adar Rishon, and he died in a regular year, which was not a leap year. So therefore, he died on Zayin Adar of a regular year. And so therefore it would work out. However, Rabbi Yaakov Emden wants to argue that if Moshe Rabbeinu was born on a leap year, he stands to reason that he died in a leap year as well. But he says that part would not go according to the Gemara in Kiddushin. And also this thing that the Magen Avraham quotes, that he died in Adar Rishon or that he died in Zayin Shvat, that certainly would not go according to the Gemara in Kiddushin. Okay, so that's the first part. Here's the second part. When the yard site is 30th of Adar Rishon. So one of the rayas that the Mahari Mintz had brought, that the real Adar is the second Adar, is because whenever we have two Adars, the second Adar is always 29 days, and the first Adar is always 30 days. When there's no leap year, how many days is a regular Adar? Always 29. So that in itself is the way that Chazal wanted to signal to us that the real Adar is the second Adar, which is exactly the same number of days as in a regular year. And that the extra month, which is added, is the first Adar. So the dilemma that you have is, what if a person dies on the 30th of Adar Aleph? This question also comes up, by the way, if a person dies on the 30th of Kislev. Because some years Kislev is 30 days, some years it's 29 days. And it happens with one other month as well. But the point is that here, it's a more prevalent issue. The Magen Avraham writes, and this is the topic of a lot of discussion. The Magen Avraham says in Siman Tav Kuf Samaches Sifkat and Chaf, he says, V'imeis, this is the end of the Magen Avraham. V'im meis, b'yom rishon de Rosh Chodesh Adar. Now, I want to read to you, the reason why you have all of these brackets in the Magen Avraham over here is because there's some controversy as to the correct girsa of the Magen Avraham over here. So I'm going to read it according to the Machatzis HaShekel, was the famous commentary on the Magen Avraham, and it's in source number 11. V'imeis b'yom rishon de Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni. That if a person dies on the first day of Rosh Chodesh of the second Adar, which is none other than what? What was yesterday? It was the 30th of Adar Rishon. So Yis'ana L'shana Haba'a b'yom Aleph de Rosh Chodesh Adar. Then the following year, which is a regular year, he should fast on the first day of Rosh Chodesh Adar. Even though technically he passed away on the 30th of Adar Rishon, but it also has the shame of Rosh Chodesh, and therefore it's appropriate for him to fast on Rosh Chodesh or observe the yahrzeit on Rosh Chodesh. V'lo b'chavtes bo, and not on the 29th of Adar, which really would be another option, because when you think about it, the 30th of Adar, when there is no 30th of Adar, so do you make it one day early, or do you make it one day late? Do you make it the 1st of Adar, or do you make it the 29th of Adar? Because basically the way you look at it is that both Adars are compressed into one. So do you make it on the day that's closest to the 30th of Adar, a day before, which is 29, or do you make it closest to the 30th of Adar, which is a day later, which would be Adar, the 1st of Adar? So the Magen Avraham says you make it on the 1st of Adar. De la'olam Adar omeid tachas Adar sheni. And the reason is because Adar, in a regular year, is really Adar sheni. And so therefore, just like the 30th of Adar Rishon is the beginning, marks the beginning of Adar sheni, so too you should fast on the beginning of Adar sheni, the 1st of Adar. So Kain Tzarech Lomar, this is the correct girsa, says the Machatzis HaShekel. V'chein mashmamu, or v'chein Matzasi muga bekuntris achron shel bal tosefes Shabbos. V'rotza lomar, and what he means to say is sheshana shemeis haisa mu'uberes v'shana achareha hi peshuta. What Machatzis HaShekel just clarifies that all the Magen Avraham means to say is that the day that the person died was a leap year, and the day of the observance of the yahrzeit is a regular year. So that's very clear from the Machatzis HaShekel. We're going to skip the Pri Megadim for a moment. And we're going to look into the Mishnah Berurah, who really just is quoting now the Magen Avraham, the way that the Machatzis HaShekel had it in his Girsa, which is, if you take a look at source number 13, source number 13 says, Imeis Aviv, it's the second paragraph in source number 13, which is from the Mishnah Berurah in Siman Tavkuf Samaches Sivkat Mem Beis. Mishnah Berurah writes, Im Meis Aviv biyom Rishon de Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni. If a person's father died in the first day of Adar Sheni, which is the first day of Rosh Chodesh of Adar Sheni, which is the 30th of Adar Rishon, Yis'ana l'shana haba shahisa shana pshuta biyom aleph de Rosh Chodesh Adar. So then, you can skip that bracket. That's actually an error. Let's just cross out those words. Pirashu lamed shva. Okay, so what you should do is you should fast in a regular year on the 1st of Rosh Chodesh Adar, v'lo b'chavtes bo, and not on the 29th. Right, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Actually, the brackets are correct. I beg your pardon. Which is basically the first day of Rosh Chodesh Adar of a regular year, since Rosh Chodesh Adar of a regular year is 2 days, so therefore you're really fasting on the 30th of Shavat, Velo b'chavtes bo, and not on the 29th. De la'olam Adar shel shana peshuta omei tachas Adar sheni shel shana me'uberes. Because we always say that the Adar of a regular year is really a surrogate for an Adar sheni, not a surrogate for Adar Rishon. And as a result, since the day that the father died marked the beginning of Adar sheni and not the beginning of Adar Rishon, so therefore, you have to fast on the beginning of Adar on a regular year, which is going to be the 30th of Shvat, the first day of Rosh Chodesh of a regular Adar. So the Mishnah Berurah is faithfully quoting the Magen Avraham. So is everyone clear on that? That if the yahrzeit is 30th of Adar Rishon, then the yahrzeit in a regular year is going to be 30 of Shvat, or really the first day of Rosh Chodesh Adar. Okay? Good. Comes along Reb Moshe, and I have to tell you, for the life of me, I don't understand Reb Moshe. I just don't understand it. I know I'm missing something. It's chaval that we don't have Reb Moshe to explain it to us. And he says as follows. It's in Yoredeach Elegimel Siman Kuf Nun Tes. V'imeis b'lamed Adar Rishon u'v'shana pshuta leka yom lamed Adar yesh likvoa b'rosh chodesh Nisan. So Rav Moshe paskins keneged the Mishnah Berurah and keneged the Magen Avraham, which is pretty surprising. And he says that no, you should make the yahrzeit on the first day of Nisan. And by the way, the first Rosh Chodesh Nisan is only one day, so you're making this Aleph Nisan, okay? Mitam, and what's the reason? Shebe'echad Adar Adayin Hayachai. Because in the first of Adar, this man was still alive. This man was still alive in the first of Adar. Because after all, he died on the 30th of Adar. And so on the 1st of Adar, this man was still alive. So if you were to make the yahrzeit on the 1st of Adar, or the first day of Rosh Chodesh Adar, you're commemorating it on a yahrzeit when this man was technically still alive. V'gam b'chav tes Adar, haya adayin chai, and he was still alive in the 29th of Adar. So Rav Moshe is seemingly ignoring this idea that really the Adar is a commemoration of the second Adar, not the first Adar. After bazeh, hayatam lomer ke'amagin Avraham legirsas machatzis hashekel. Even though we could argue to the contrary, there would be a good reason to say the opposite, that we should make the yahrzeit on the first day of Rosh Chodesh Adar, which is the 30th of Shavat. According to, this is what the Magen Avraham says, the way the Machatzis HaShekel has the Girsa, Shehayartzeit Yihya Aleph de Rosh Chodesh Adar. Mitam Demasik, as the Magen Avraham says, the Adar B'Shana Pshuta Hu Omei Tachas Adar Sheni B'Meu Beres. As the Magen Avraham says, that a regular Adar acts as a replacement for a second Adar, not for a first Adar. So since this man passes away at the beginning of the second Adar, so then when you commemorate his yahrzeit, make it at the beginning of a regular Adar. Okay. Avol yesh tam gadol linhog hayartzeit b'Rosh Chodesh Nisan. However, says Rav Moshe, on the other hand, I have an argument to argue why you should make the yahrzeit on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Me'achar dechai b'shana ha'avra kol Chodesh Adar. Because Lamaisa, last year, he actually lived through an entire month called Adar. And if he lived through an entire month called Adar, so then you should make his yahrzeit after Adar is finished, on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Avol mikeven sheyatza mehamogen Avraham, yesh yoser lasos kehamogen Avraham. But, even though I would like to argue not like the Magen Avraham. If the Magen Avraham says not like me, then we should go like the Magen Avraham. But then listen to what he says. Ach ulai, but perhaps. Kaven shegirsas halavushe srad v'hapri magadim eino kain. Ela dina acher. He says that there's another girsa of reading the Magen Avraham, which is de b'meis b'yom rishon de Rosh Chodesh Adar Yis'ana b'yom rishon de Rosh Chodesh Adar v'lo b'chav tes Shvat. That their girsa of the Magen Avraham is that when a person dies on Rosh Chodesh Adar of a regular year, which is the 30th day of Shavat, then a person should fast on Rosh Chodesh Adar and not of a regular year and not the 29th of Shavat. Shehu din pashutu barur. V'lo huskar din mishemes b'yom lamed la'adar rishon. And therefore, not at all is the Magen Avraham talking about a case that the Mishnah Berurah and the Machatzis HaShekel think that the Magen Avraham is talking about, which is our example of when a person dies on the 30th of Adar Rishon. Hare legir suzu lo yatsa me'hamagen Avraham klal din zeh, ve'im kein yochol asus gam benissen di'ishtam lekan o lekan, avicha o havecha b'leiv v'nefesh Moshe Feinstein. He's writing this tshuva to his son, and he tells his son that there's another way of having a girsa in this Magen Avraham, such that the Magen Avraham is not at all talking about where a person dies in the 30th of Adar Rishon. And according to that girsa, the Magen Avraham is really not discussing this issue at all. And since there's a svara to argue that you should wait until Rosh Chodesh Nisan because this man lived through an entire month called Adar. Therefore, you can make his yahrzeit on the 1st of Nisan and not the 1st of Rosh Chodesh Adar. That's the conclusion of Reb Moshe, because now we don't have a Magen Avraham that we're obligated to rely on or to paskin like. And here's my dilemma. My dilemma is that Reb Moshe, I don't think, is quoting the Pri Megadim faithfully. And this is the problem that I have, and I'm going to leave this with a tzarchiyun in Reb Moshe, at least according to my feeble understanding, because I just don't know how he could read the Pri Megadim this way. If you look at the Pri Megadim and his girsa of the Magen Avraham, he reads it as follows. It's back in source number 12. Remember, what Reb Moshe says is that the Magen Avraham was not at all discussing what happens when a person dies in a leap year. That was not his discussion. But the reality is if you look at the look at the Pri Megadim, I don't think that's what it reads. He says, "Uvesofa os mashakasa v'imes b'yom rishon de Rosh Chodesh Adar yis'anu l'shana haba b'yom rishon de Rosh Chodesh Adar v'lo b'chavtes bo yeroe lahagia v'lo b'chavtes b'shvat." So the Pri Megadim's girsa is slightly different from the Machatzis HaShekel. He says that what the Magen Avraham means to say is like this: that if a person dies on Rosh Chodesh Adar, then the following year you should fast on the first day of Rosh Chodesh Adar, which is also the 30th of Shvat, and not on the 29th of Shvat. Delo tema, because don't think Yom Shloshim l'Chodesh Ha'avar v'hava chavtes b'Shvat l'Shana Haba. Don't think that the 39th of Adar from last year would translate into the 29th of Adar in the following year. In other words, let's say from one year to the next, Shvat changes from 30 days to 29 days. So the Magen Avraham is essentially telling you, don't think that you should change and say that, well, I'll fast on the 29th of Shvat because the Taka, the guy died on the 29th of Shvat, or the 30th of Shvat, and there's no 30th of Shvat, so I'll push it back one day. And he says that's not true, because Adar always stays in its place, even when you have a leap year followed by a regular year. Okay. So basically, the way the Pri Megadim seems to be reading the Magen Avraham is that don't fast ever on the observe yahrzeit on the 29th of Shvat the following year, even if the following year is a regular year. In other words, if this year turns out that if this year the yahrzeit, the person passed away on the first day of Rosh Chodesh Adar, so then the following year you should observe the yahrzeit on Rosh Chodesh Adar, not on the 29th of Shvat. And the Pri Megadim says explicitly is that you shouldn't think that things change from a leap year to a regular year. The way that Reb Moshe seems to be reading the Pri Megadim is not at all talking about leap years versus regular years. And he seems just to be telling us the standard halacha, that if a person died on a day, in a month where there's 30 days, and the following year that month only has 29 days, you push it off to Rosh Chodesh and don't observe the yahrzeit on day 29. It's got nothing to do with Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni. My problem is with Reb Moshe is that the Pri Megadim states explicitly that he's dealing with a situation where the first year was a leap year and the second year was a regular year. So I don't think that he's creating a machlokus between the Machatzis HaShekel and the Pri Megadim, where I don't really think that such a machlokus needs to necessarily be. I think that the Pri Megadim is saying the same thing as the Machatzis HaShekel, but he's using a slightly different girsa. What he's reading into it is that when you have first a leap year, where the person passed away on Rosh Chodesh Adar Rishon, which is in a regular year going to correspond to it's the 30th of Adar, so don't observe the yahrzeit in the following year on the 29th of Shavat. and say that, well, because it's a regular year, and he passed away on the 30th of a Adar Rishon, that translates into a Shavat observance, but rather it turns into a Rosh Chodesh Adar observance of a regular year. I think that's the way to read the Pri Megadim, so that it's not an argument with the Machatzis HaShekel, but I could be wrong. But anyway, Rav Moshe obviously felt that there was a machlokus as to how to read the Magen Avram, and on that basis, Rav Moshe says you have the option of observing the yard site on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Bottom line is, we have a machlokus between the Mishnah Berurah and Rav Moshe as to when a person passes away on the 30th of Adar Rishon, when the yard site is. The Mishnah Berurah and the Machatzis HaShekel clearly hold that the observance of yard site is on the 1st of Adar Sheni, which is in a regular year, it's the first day of Adar. And Rav Moshe says that it can be on the first day of Nisan. Okay, it's a little bit confusing, I know. But anyway, I just wanted to finish with that. Any questions? Okay. Shkayach.
A child is born on the 30th of Adar, bar mitzvah. Assuming it's not a Hebrew year, the year of bar mitzvah.
So if a child is born on the 30th of Adar Rishon, and the bar mitzvah year is a regular year, so based on the svara of the Maharimins, that he has to undergo 13 full years, it would seem that you'd have to wait until the end of Adar before he's considered to be a bar mitzvah. You'd have to make his bar mitzvah on the 1st of Nisan. Because the Marimin says that when it comes to bar mitzvah, it's dependent upon the determination of the Beis Din. If the Beis Din says that this is a shorter year, so then you go according to the criterion of the criteria of the Beis Din. So it would seem to me that according to what we've been learning, the child's bar mitzvah you'd have to wait till Adar elapses before you could consider him to be a bar mitzvah.
The child born the next day, on the 1st of Adar, Sheni.
That's right. That's right. So his bar mitzvah is going to be a month before. As a matter of fact, this was the case that was discussed by the Maharimins. His case was one child is born on the 1st of Adar Sheni, and the other child is born on the 29th of Adar Rishon. He didn't discuss the case of 30 Adar Rishon, because in that case, when he's born on the 29th of Adar Rishon, so then in a regular year, his birthday would be on the 29th of Adar. But when he's born on the 30th of Adar Rishon, it would seem also that you have to wait until the end of Adar, because that's when he was born at the end of Adar. You have to wait till the end of Adar.